against your governance strategies. So maybe you have a lot of questions about security. So definitely need to address those things before proceeding with that deployment. So that's what we're covering in detail in this module number 2 on all the different tools that we have available. So you can easily apply those governance guidelines into Microsoft Teams. So let's get started with module number 2. So for module number 2, first let's start reviewing the agenda. So module number 2 is about implementing Microsoft Teams governance, security, and compliance. So here we have 2 lessons: implementing governance and lifecycle management for Microsoft Teams. Second, implementing security, and third one, implement compliance. So we're talking about deployment for Microsoft Teams. Before actually thinking about deploying and installing and configuring the Teams client, first you need to take a step back, and definitely you may have a lot of questions about who should be able to create teams, who should be able to join those teams, who should be able to publish messages, and also will be allow external people to collaborate on those teams. Are there also any naming conventions that we must follow for those teams? So definitely before start thinking about deployment, we should definitely first address those questions. And on this module, definitely we'll see all the different technologies that we have available for you that definitely will help you to follow that governance strategy as you're going into Microsoft Teams. So let's start with the first lesson: implement governance and lifecycle management for Microsoft Teams. So keep in mind that identity provider behind the scenes for Microsoft 365 is Azure Active Directory. So every time that you create a new team inside Microsoft Teams, actually creates a Microsoft 365 group behind the scenes for you inside Azure Directory. So definitely that's what we have in there. And keep in mind that those Microsoft 365 groups are definitely targeted to help you and address all those different collaboration scenarios. So every time you create one group inside that Azure AD instance, basically that group will be enabled automatically, for example, with a mailbox in Exchange Online. It also will have like a site already created for you inside SharePoint, definitely to facilitate all these different collaboration tasks. So all these things happens behind the scenes for you. Keep in mind also that we talked before module number 1, what's under the hood. Remember Microsoft Teams, remember all those different technologies like SharePoint, Exchange Online, work definitely closely. So definitely you have like that crucial component that allow us to collaborate in that easy way is definitely that Microsoft 365 group. So naturally what happens behind the scenes every time you need Teams, you may have like a lot of questions. So usually definitely when I work with organizations, they will look to deploy Teams. To install the Teams client is super easy, but you may not have a lot of questions like, for example, who can create groups, naming conventions, any naming conventions that we should apply, meeting capabilities. So all the people should be able to send files, all people should be able to share memes or not in there, also gets access. Maybe we need to collaborate with third parties or providers. So who should be allowed to log in and why they will be allowed to interact. And also remember, talk about all those interesting capabilities in terms of integration. So we will allow any third-party apps inside this environment or not, or only approved apps. Maybe we would like to limit to a list of all those different available applications inside Microsoft Teams. And the last question, always important, you may have concerns about security. So what happens about the data that you will be sharing inside Microsoft Teams? Some cases, maybe you would like to definitely avoid that any intellectual property or any personal information can be filtered inside those chats. Could be also if you're working maybe in a regulated industry, maybe you still need to be compliant with things like PCI, GDPR. So we'll see definitely the tool set that we have available that can just be leveraged easily in this case to apply all those different governance strategies also on the data that is shared inside Teams. So just a quick overview in terms of all those governance requirements that you may have, and just explore what can you do. So for example, when we talk about that, who can create that Microsoft 365 group? Who can create actually teams inside Microsoft Teams? So definitely keep in mind that depends also on permissions. In this case, also should be able to create a SharePoint site. Should be able in this case, if I create that Teams inside Microsoft Teams, you know that will create a Microsoft 365 group behind the scenes, and that group will have like that mailbox in Exchange Online, and also we have that site on SharePoint. Also for those ad hoc one-on-one conversations. Remember, the files are stored on OneDrive. And also, who should be able in this case also to collaborate separately. For in this case, for example, you have already libraries in SharePoint. You have also already, I guess, distribution leads. For example, maybe could be related to those permissions. So usually the people that already is allowed to create those sites, so people that's already allowed to create a new distribution group, usually is the people that should be allowed in this case also to create teams. Keep in mind that by default, everyone on that Microsoft 365 environment will be allowed to create a new team by default. After that, in terms of naming conventions, any definitely prefix, any particular convention that you need to follow to create those names of the teams. Yeah, you can also maybe would like to limit and use a specific naming convention. That way, definitely people should be able to use descriptive names and to be easily just to identify that group or that team to collaborate. After that, you may also want to block some specific words to be used on the names of the teams as well. In terms of that, configure gets access definitely is all about collaboration with people external to your organization. So who can add actually those guest users, collaborators coming from a different Azure AD tenant. Also, if they should be able to collaborate and access the files inside those channels in Microsoft Teams. So definitely have control all over the options. You should be able to turn on or off those sharing settings. Also, you can enable, disable guest access also on files on OneNote and also just to files inside those SharePoint sites as well. In terms of configure expiry, in some cases, maybe you would like to set an expiration. So maybe some content that maybe could be that is, depending if you're on the industry, or maybe it could be just an internal policy. And for example, you said, let's say that all the content should be available and I should be able to navigate and browse through the content for the last 6 years. After that, the content will be expired. And definitely also customize the actions, what will happen next. So definitely all those things you can be definitely easily apply those definitions inside Microsoft Teams. In terms of also policies, you have different set of policies. Maybe you have requirements in terms of also retention. Maybe you need to keep the data for a specific amount of time. Also something that we know as e-discovery. In some cases, for audit purposes, maybe you like to, for example, retrieve and access the content of those chat conversations. Yeah, you also have those capabilities available. And last but not least, also in terms of DLP, data loss prevention. What happens if those are critical, definitely records that are shared inside Microsoft Teams? And also if you operate in a regulated industry, maybe you definitely don't want, for example, people to, let's say, if I'm operating that financial industry, for example, to share credit card numbers directly into those chat conversations. So definitely can also put rules in this case and avoid having this kind of data shared in those conversations with Microsoft Teams. Also, you can also use things like templates. For example, to create a Teams, and that team template already has all those different tabs or different applications that are ready to use. Yeah, you can also definitely create templates. And also in terms of templates, remember where the data is actually stored inside SharePoint. So it could be also SharePoint site design templates as well. And the last piece also super important in terms of monitoring, you should be in control. When you talk about security, super important, always definitely have that visibility, who is doing what, who changed what into the environment. So we have different tools. Remember, we explored that Teams Admin Center. So we have also some interesting reports available in there. So understand those behaviors of end users. You can also set up easily alerts. You can also remember in SharePoint, you also have visibility about those files and how users are interacting with all those sites. In Office 365 Admin Center, you also have interesting reports. You can set up alerts as well. For example, every time there's, let's say you put a policy to filter PCI records. So you don't want to share, for example, information related to credit cards directly in the chat. If someone tries to share this information, definitely this can be flagged out and it can send you an alert over email. And also we have interesting resources like an adoption content pack available, and also those reports that you can also get access. Definitely we'll explore those things in more detail. So let's move on. So Kerwin talks about create and manage Microsoft 365 groups. Keep in mind, this is the ultimate enabler for those teams inside Microsoft Teams. So definitely will be one of those crucial decisions. Who should be able to create new Microsoft 365 groups. Keep in mind that by default, all the users in that Microsoft 365 environment can create a new team, but you may want to limit that. So definitely we'll see the strategies that you can apply in this case to limit who should be able in this case to create those new teams. So you can definitely limit this behavior using PowerShell. For example, you can designate just a specific security group and only the members of that security group will be allowed in this case to create new Microsoft 365 groups. So obviously this will affect the behavior in terms. So only the people that are members of the group will be able in this case to create new teams. About expiration, things that you can do, definitely you can configure also Microsoft 365 expiration settings. For example, let's say that after, let's say 6 months or after a year, if no one is actually using that group anymore, you may want to definitely just archive that group or expire that group. And after that will be definitely maintained for 30 days after deletion. So during that time, you can just restore that group anytime, but after 30 days, all the data inside that group is deleted. So definitely super important to optimize the storage that you have available for that Microsoft 365 environment. You can definitely do those definitions. Keep in mind that for those settings, it requires to have an Azure AD premium license to have those capabilities, but you can definitely set up expiration for those groups. So it could be, let's say it was just a temporary project, maybe that you created that team for, and after that, let's say 6 months, that team is not actually relevant. No one is using that team anymore. So you can just automatically have that group delete for you. Another thing that you can do is also naming conventions. So you can also set up naming policies inside Microsoft 365 groups. And for that, also keep in mind also requires an Azure AD premium license as well, but you can definitely also apply just those naming conventions. For example, if you need to follow a prefix, usually it will be, for example, a couple of letters or 3 letters in this case to identify the company, and after that could be to identify the department and so on. So definitely try to make those names descriptive, so definitely can identify this is the department or this is the team that people should join. You definitely can apply those naming conventions using those options inside Azure AD. Another option interesting, talking about security compliance, keep in mind we have those very rich, powerful reports available in the Microsoft Teams Admin Center. So from there you can have that visibility. For example, you can understand usage report, for example, number of users that connected to your environment over time. For example, there are any peaks, so you can understand definitely those behaviors from the users and actually what kind of meetings or what kind of actions they definitely were working on as they're connected to your environment. So definitely have the visibility and also even understand, for example, what type of clients they're using. They're using computers, they're using mobile devices. Definitely can have those detailed reports inside that Microsoft Teams admin interface. So keep in mind, required roles, in this case, to get access to those reports, definitely need to be either a global admin, either be a Teams admin, or either be a Skype for Business admin, and all those different reports that are available. So in general, we have also reports available in Microsoft 365. So the previous one, remember, were just targeted for Microsoft Teams, but overall also for Microsoft 365, you have also some interesting reports available. So you have things like executive summary, things like that, just easily, for example, have that visibility, types of devices that are connecting to the environment in the last 6 days, 30 days, 90 days, 180 days. You can also have that visibility about activation and licensing. Could be maybe you have like 1,000 licenses, but are actually users using that environment or not? So definitely have that visibility, that traceability, some powerful results, and actually behind the scenes, actually those are built inside the Power BI. And also you can of course create customized reports if you're familiar with Power BI. Yeah, you can also fully just grab that data and also build your own reports as well. So let's go to the next lesson here. It's all about implementing security. So we go deeper in terms of security for Microsoft Teams. So when it comes to security, keep in mind that Microsoft Teams one of the first components, one of the first things that you need to definitely to get access to the service is to authenticate yourself. So in this case, in terms of authentication, Microsoft Teams supports at a glance 3 types of authentication. So something that we know, cloud identity. Basically, those are for organizations that create user accounts directly into that Azure AD environment. So definitely, maybe as you're starting, you don't require actually to have an existing Active Directory environment. So you can just create the accounts directly on top of Azure AD. Secondly, something that is known as Synchronized Identity. So with our Synchronized Identity is we have an existing Active Directory environment. You can synchronize that existing user and group base to Azure AD and use those user accounts for Microsoft 365. So definitely need to recreate your whole user base. You can just grab what's in your environment. And definitely in terms of authentication, we support also multiple schemas in this case to facilitate single sign-on. So definitely we're having like different usernames and password for all those environments. So you can just grab that existing password from that AD environment. And the last one, also something that is known as federation identity. So in this case, you can definitely federate with an existing also Active Directory environment in case you're using that federation platform to authenticate to things like Microsoft 365 and other services as well. So there's definitely kind of the interesting capabilities of having that federation. Basically, anything that understands SAML can be authenticated against that federation platform, so not just Microsoft 365. And also on top of that, really useful in terms of security nowadays, having just one single factor to authenticate users, something like the password, is not enough in terms of security. So definitely is a good idea to have something like multi-factor authentication. Keep in mind that as part of Azure AD, we also have those things like MFA enabled by default. And keep in mind that usually we talk about authentication, either those are legacy authentication methods or modern authentication. Microsoft Teams use modern authentication. So basically we use things like SAML, things like OAuth, OpenID, in this case for authentication workflows. So in terms of security, super useful nowadays. Definitely configure something like multi-factor authentication. In this case, to apply those settings, instead of definitely going manually and one by one, for example, enable those MFA control for users, we have something that definitely is more simple, something that is known as conditional access. So with conditional access, you can actually do a definition of the rules. Something that we see here on the screen, for example, you can target specific users or groups. You can target the specific applications. So it could be something like Microsoft Teams. You can also build the conditions, for example, just outside that corporate environment or just connections coming from those particular countries. And after that, in access controls, you can see you can grant access, but you can require multi-factor authentication. So you can just easily, for example, apply those MFA controls here. In case also you have something like Microsoft Intune, can be also easily integrated. There's a control available here, device to market as compliant inside Microsoft Intune. So those controls can be definitely easily integrated in that definition. So in terms of security, we have also something that is known as Microsoft 365 ATP, Advanced Threat Protection. So definitely like to help you to enhance that collaboration. In terms of that collaboration, definitely we understand you're likely to share files, but in some cases, definitely hackers can take that as a vulnerability and, for example, put malicious code inside those files. So how we can avoid something like that? In this case, as part of that ATP service, we can definitely scan those files for you, and definitely we can identify potential malicious codes introduced into those files, and definitely can get that visibility. You can block access to those files, and also you can have alerts available that can be sent to an administrator. So keep in mind, though, that will apply for all the different services inside Microsoft 365, not just Teams. So this is just kind of like that visibility in terms of the reports and alerts that we have available. So definitely very powerful. So definitely reports and alerts based by identities. So it could be, for example, I can target just activity related to, for example, let's say global administrators. It could be any users. It could be also, for example, to specific data. So you can also create labels. So for example, you can set up alerts. Any alerts or flags in this case detected to particular confidential data based on these labels. Also could be devices. Could be that maybe, let's say in your environment, you only have iOS devices that are provided and that corporate environment. So maybe someone uses an Android device, maybe could be a red flag. So you can also have that visibility easily into those alerts. And also that service I just described in the previous slide, ATP, definitely alerts for those malware files that were identified by ATP. You can also get those alerts available in here. You can also go deeper and easily create those reports. So last piece is all about compliance. So when it comes to compliance, we'll see different options that you have available in the toolset of Microsoft Teams. So let's start first something that is known as labels. So we have two types of labels. So either those are sensitivity labels, so definitely it's just more to help you to classify documents. In this case, let's say those are confidential or sensitive in nature. So maybe definitely just a handful of individuals should actually have access to those files. You can also be granular, for example, who should be able to read, who should be able to modify those documents. Definitely can also build those different sensitive labels, maybe information that is only available for people from your organization, that definitely maybe information that is confidential in nature and people outside the organization shouldn't be allowed to access this kind of information. Yeah, you can build those definitions on those sensitive labels. Secondly, we have also retention policies and labels. In this case, it's more for that scenario when you, for example, would like to have that expiration time. For example, let's say I definitely would like to keep information for the last 5-6 years available. And after that, what I will do, I will delete that data. I will still need to keep it. So definitely can also build those definitions in those retention policies and labels. So in terms of that retention policy, what you can do, basically that retention policy that is linked to that label that you created on that previous step. Basically, you can build policies around preservation. For example, just keep the data around a specific period of time. So let's say 5-6 years, but after that, I will not do nothing. So data is still there. Just make sure that data is not deleted. Secondly, you can definitely say after 5-6 years, I would like to just delete the data. And the last one is just delete. For example, information that has a specific threshold, let's say 1 year or 3 years, and after that I will just delete. I'm not make sure that in this case the data will be preserved for a specific period of time. So after that, data is just directly delete. So basically that's all the different definitions that we have on that retention policy available. And also keep in mind that basically this will apply in this case of Teams, will apply for those chat conversations, so one-on-one or one-to-many, that definitely takes place inside that Teams client. Keep in mind those are Microsoft 365 compliance rules, so definitely will apply for more than just Teams. You'll see actually here, you can definitely specify locations like SharePoint, OneDrive, Office 365 groups, Skype for Business, Exchange. In this case, you can also just target also this specifically for Teams. Next policy that you have available is that create and manage DLP policy. Basically here we'll leverage those sensitive labels. And in this case, based on the definition of the label, for example, if this is confidential information, I can say, you know what, if this is an email and in the email I have the confidential word on the subject or on the content of the document that maybe is attached to that email, I definitely not authorizing this information to be sent to people outside the organization. That you can definitely easily build those policies. Keep in mind, those policies will apply all over across Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive, and of course, Microsoft Teams. And also in this case for Microsoft Teams, particularly interesting, it will apply also for the conversations. So for all those chats conversation, let's say, if there's any, in this case, let's say, I will forbid in this case, for example, to share social security numbers. So in the case someone tries to share a social security number, I know that there's a specific format for that type of information. And in this case, you can just block this type of records to be shared into the conversations of Microsoft Teams. And remember the alerts talked about before. You can also just get an alert sent to you and definitely just report that someone tried to share this kind of information in a chat. So definitely can have that visibility easily with those DLP policies and block definitely people sharing confidential information outside the organization. After that, in terms of compliance, you may definitely in some cases have requirements that, for example, you will need, for example, have the information that is shared inside the organization to be definitely searchable and auditable. So in this case, you have something that is known as e-discovery. So with this e-discovery, you can basically create searchers. For example, let's say I would like to just filter out the conversations with a specific wording in all the Microsoft 365 organization. So definitely this will include Teams. And after that, you can actually extract the content of that information. So definitely be aware in some cases, depending on the industry and the policy of the organization, definitely you may want to have like an authorization of the users actually for you to actually be able to search and retrieve the content of their conversations. But in other cases, should be able definitely without authorization, depending on the domain, the industry you operate, to definitely do these kind of things. But keep in mind, this actually will extract information coming from emails, information coming from Microsoft Teams conversation, and you will be able to definitely get the visibility of the content of these conversations. After that, the last piece that we have available in terms of compliance and security, in some cases, for example, let's say you have C-level executives, maybe a team that may be just working in something that is not yet available for more people on the company. So maybe just need to keep that collaboration just for that specific team. So in case of those confidential nature environments or requirements, definitely have something that is known as barrier policy. So with those barrier policies, basically you can just forbid certain actions. For example, who should be able to search for a user, who should be able to add a member of a team, should be able in this case to start a chat conversation with that person, or also start a group chat with a specific distribution group. For example, let's say I have like a distribution group or a team where I have all the C-level executives. In some cases, definitely not a good idea. Anyone should be able to just start a conversation with that group, definitely. So for example, to limit these kind of operations, you can definitely create that barrier policy. So to put that in place, super easy. What you will need to do, definitely first just do the definition about all the different barriers. What you like to definitely to achieve, what you would like to in this case. Put that blocker who should be able, who should not be able in this case to talk to several groups of teams inside the organization. And after that, just part one, definitely segment the users, identify those barriers. Second, define information barrier policies. And third one, just apply the information of those barrier policies. So this was recently introduced and it definitely very powerful. Definitely heard feedback coming from users. Some cases definitely will definitely look into limit behaviors, in this case, to disrupt productivity. Keep in mind overall, definitely teams should be able definitely to enhance or improve that collaboration, but definitely things like this in terms of security, you may want to limit who should be able in this case to contact a specific team inside the organization. And last piece in terms of security is also super important to have that visibility. So definitely be alerted if something is going wrong inside the environment, if there's a potential security risk. So to do that, we have definitely all those alerts available. Remember, we can target by group, we can target by activity, we can target by label. So all those different things can be definitely used in the definition of those alerts. So at a glance, as you're working with those alerts, what you can do, first, definitely you need to be an administrator. And as an administrator, definitely keep in mind that you will create, configure, and turn on. We have also different default alert definitions available. You can just definitely with a flip of a switch, enable those default alert policies. So after that, as users are performing those activities, so it could be, for example, like trying to share a social security number on a chat, or I'd like to send an email, and inside the content of that document that is attached, there's a word confidential. So as user definitely working on the environment, third step is basically this will create an alert, and you can just definitely set up those notifications. So they will send you an email, and on that email, you will get all the details. So basically who, what, and when exactly happened. So definitely describe very in detail what happened in the alert that you will receive over email. All those alerts also are available inside the Microsoft 365 Security and Compliance Center. So that's kind of the last piece that we have in this module. So next we have a demo coming on, definitely I will have the opportunity to show you how those things actually work in a real environment. So let's go to that demo. On that demo, I will show you, first of all, definitely how to implement that governance and lifecycle. So definitely things like those naming conventions. And also after that, we'll see that implement security for Microsoft Teams. Definitely we'll see the definition of those labels. And the last piece, implement compliance on Microsoft Teams. Definitely we'll see how those things in action are available in terms of that reporting and all those labels applied. So let's go with that demo. So let's go to that demo machine. And first step, actually we'll be working on the command line. I will create actually 3 different labels, in this case related to that sensitivity label. I will create a label called standard, another called internal, another called confidential. And after that, actually, I will be using those labels to create policies. So first of all, actually, I will let me sure I'm using, in this case, this definitely is created inside Azure AD. Just making sure I have that Azure AD preview module installed. So that's the Azure AD, just run that command, install module in a PowerShell window, Azure AD preview. So that's in this case the module we need to use to create the definition of those labels in the command line. Although keep in mind, it's also possible to create those labels as well on the graphical interface, but for now, I will use in the command line just to show you those capabilities. Behind the scenes, actually, if I do this on the graphical interface, it will actually create the labels. It will use PowerShell basically to do the definition. So for now, just directly run the commands here. Just let's wait a couple of seconds until the module is installed. Okay, so it's installing the package. There you go. So just install that module. So now, first step, definitely we'll need to connect. So just run that connect Azure AD. Definitely need to authenticate. I will authenticate using that admin from my tenant. Just that admin at m365.x. Also just authenticating myself. And in this case, so let me put the password. So I'm authenticated. And in this case, first thing that I will do, I will basically use a template. So I'm going to put this in a variable. So I'm going to create a variable called template. So with the following command, I'm creating a template here. With the next line of code, I just validate if Azure AD is already set up or not. Otherwise, I'm leveraging that template. After that, I will create the different labels. So with this command, I first will create that confidential. You'll see standard, internal, confidential. All 3 will use the same base template. After that, we'll just set up each one of those different labels. So let's start with that standard label, general communication. After that, super important, just to make sure that I'm getting all the proper values. Just gonna put this setting dot values. Okay, yeah, you'll see those are the values of that standard setting template. So it's working properly. And now with the next command, I will just create the definition directly into Azure AD. So the command is new Azure AD directory setting dash directory setting. And in here, I will just add the definition coming from that variable setting that includes all the different templates that I created previously. Next step, what I will do, just make sure to populate those settings. So basically just creating the definition. So now it's time to assign it with that set Azure AD directory setting. There you go. So just assign definition. So for now, we just created those 3 labels. So the next step will be actually to assign those classifications. So we'll go back for now. We'll jump to the other client. And on the other client, I will go straight to the site, teams.microsoft.com. So for now, we'll open the web version. And here I will also authenticate using that account from Lin. So the account is Lin R at M365 X, the name of my tenant, on Microsoft.com. There you go. So just authenticating using that user. For now, we'll work on the web version. So use the web app instead. So remember that previously created sales team. So we click here on the 3 dots on the right, and I will select edit team. So here see that there's a classification added. So I must update those settings. So we'll select change settings. And here definitely now we need to specify one of those classifications, those labels that I created previously. So for now, let's say that sales will contain confidential information. So I select that confidential category and I will select that done option. There you go. So just successful again with that account and added that confidential classification. So let's go back to the other client, and in here I'm gonna double check a couple of settings. First of all, let's check that expiration that I talked about before. So those settings, remember, are part of that Azure AD. So in this case, to manage those settings, I will need to go to the Azure Portal. So to go to the Azure Portal, I will go to portal.azure.com and I will authenticate with that administrator account. So for now, just select maybe later. After that, I will just choose the services available in here. And from the list of services, I will jump straight to Azure AD. So in Azure Active Directory, I will go to groups. And in groups, you see different, remember, all those groups basically are represented in here, are those teams that we have on that Teams interface. All of those are Microsoft 365 groups. Remember that sales team is basically the one that represents it. So for now, what I will do, I will just, under that all groups view, I will select this option on the left, expiration. Remember that the expiration setting is available. And in this case, you can put a lifetime. So actually gonna put, let's say, a custom 90 days. So after 90 days, there are no mails, no activity, no file shared into that Microsoft 365 team. It becomes stale and member will be deleted. And after that, still should be able in the next 30 days after that last day to recover the information anytime. But after that, after 30 days, the content will be completely deleted. So after that, always super important to send a notification. So in this case, let's say we'll send a notification to that user Johnny, just to notify in this case when that operation takes place. Any of those groups become in this case still after 90 days. So just put in the address here. So that's the name of my user in this case that will receive the notification. And you can see I can enable this for all the groups, or I can specify groups. So for now, actually, let's select specific groups. Otherwise, definitely will affect all the existing Microsoft 365 groups. And in here, you can see I will add, for now, I will select just Teams rollout that I created previously, only enabled for that one. It's always a good idea to start with a couple of groups, testing features, and once you're ready, definitely maybe to expand those to other groups as well. So here you're gonna select save. So next, what I will do, I will go back to Azure PowerShell. And in this case, what I will do, I will create a policy, in this case, to limit who should be able, in this case, to create Microsoft 365 groups. Remember, this is possible using PowerShell. In this case, I will run a couple of lines in PowerShell and will select a group, and only the members of a group that will be known as group creators will be allowed, in this case, to create Microsoft 365 groups. And in this case, also be able to create teams inside Microsoft Teams. Remember, by default, the behavior is anyone should be able to do it, but for now, I will limit that capability. So first, I will run this command, new Azure AD group. And this command basically just creates a new group. Remember, it needs to be a security group, but basically only those members of that group creators will be allowed to create new teams. So that's a command, new Azure AD group. So that's the display name, group creators. This is a security group, may enable false. And that's the nickname, group creators. So after that, what I will do, I will, in this case, super important, I'll definitely need that object ID. And what I will do, in this case, I will need to replace that object ID with the value coming from that previous command. So let me prepare, in this case, the next command will be add Azure AD group member, basically to manually add Lynn as a member of that recently created group on the previous step. So just let me add that command, and definitely I will need to grab that object ID from that previous command. So just manually running the command Azure AD group member, just to add a new member. I will need to definitely grab that object ID coming from the previous command. We just copy that value. There you go, so just grabbing that object ID from the previous group and adding, in this case, Lynn as a member of that group. It's just a command, definitely prepare this beforehand, so I need to definitely keep you waiting as I type in those comments. Next command, basically just grab the definition of the unified group template. Remember, I created previously, and in this case, I would apply this to the recently group unified definition. All right, so that next command, just template, get Azure AD directory setting template. Basically, just grab that template again. After that, next command, also make sure the setting is available in Azure AD. Otherwise, I will apply it. Next one is just making sure that enable group creation, remember, is the feature we try to limit in this case, is basically disabled. So enable group creation false. So that will be the default behavior. And in this case, we basically just grant that capability only for the members of that group creators group. So that's actually what I'm doing with the next command, with Azure AD, share string, group creators, object ID. And now just we'll write that back into the configuration of Azure AD. So with those commands, basically I just limit, in this case, the creation of new Microsoft 365 groups. So this will also affect, remember, creation of teams inside Microsoft Teams, only for the members of that group creators group that I just added. So let's try it out. So we go back here. And in this case, I will also use the web version. And let me switch to a different user. Do a sign out. In this case, I will log in using an account that belongs in this case to Megan. So here it will use as another account, and in this case is that account of Megan. There you go. Cool. So for now, just also use that web version. So once I'm on that web interface, if I click here on the left, remember at the bottom that option join or create team. So let's select that option. In this case, you see I no longer have that create team option available because I limit that capability only for members of that group creators. In this case, Megan is not a member of that group. That's why in this case is not able to create a new team, only to join an existing one. So see that setting we just modified before is working. So also on the Teams desktop application, you should see definitely the same behavior. So let's continue. Next thing I would like to show you is the creation of a naming policy. Remember, if you like to apply a naming convention, so definitely make those names descriptive. You definitely need to follow a 16 specific guideline. So to do that, also it's possible to do it inside that Azure AD. So I need to switch to that Azure AD, same place as before, Azure AD groups, and here in all groups, you see just under expiration, I have that naming policy. So that naming policy, definitely first, I definitely can add those blocked words, and I can also add the specific group naming policy. So for now, I will click on that naming policy, and in here you see I can specify this existing policy, I can modify that, or I can just add the prefix and that definition. So for now, what I will do, in this case, just specify for now the block words. So you can see this is a specific CSV format. So first I will download that CSV file to specify the definition. So definitely there's a particular format that I can add that block words. So definitely this will not allow to create any groups using the words that I can specify on this list. So first, once I open that file on Excel, I'll just add separated by comma. I would add all those words, in this case, CO, payroll, and HR, let's say. So that will be my line, the works I will like to block in this case. Just let me save it. There you go. So now I'll just go straight to that step number 3, upload that CSV file. And we'll just type in again that CSV file that I just added previously. And I'm gonna hit save. There you go. So now just gonna quickly show you that naming convention, the other tab. So in here, let's say in add suffix, definitely let's say there's a particular suffix that I need to follow. So we'll select attribute in this case, and we'll specify country or region. And in this case, for that country or region, let's also add a prefix. I will select add prefix. In this case, I will put a string, and I will put also, let's say, group. So let's say you need to specify in this case the group name. So the definition in this case will be something like that. We'll see group name, country or region. So definitely that's the naming convention that I should follow in this case. So after that, for now, just would like to show you that for now I have the time to apply it. For now, actually, we'll discard the changes. Not gonna save it for now. And let's proceed. We'd like to show you definitely are those options in terms of security. So explore ATP and also the compliance options. So let's go to the Microsoft 365 Security and Compliance Center. So to go there, just simply need to type in this URL, security.microsoft.com. Let me say, maybe you need to authenticate, maybe pick the single sign-on. Okay, there you go. So I'm that Security and Compliance Center. And first, let's take a quick look on those ATP policies. So on the left, just gonna click here in policies, and in here you see all those others I talked about before, also device configuration. And in this case, for now, let's explore that ATP save attachments policy. So this ATP policy basically will filter and scan for malicious code in all the attached files that are shared. It doesn't matter, in Exchange Online, in SharePoint, could be also in Teams as well. And it will basically help you to validate these kind of things. So by default, definitely there are some settings that you can see, just need to enable this, and this will enable those capabilities in the whole tenant. So actually I'm gonna turn this on. I'm gonna save it, double check this is configured on your environment. And actually what I will do, I will work with those retention policies. Remember before I created that sensitivity policy, but now let's follow those retention policies. So those can also be created on a graphical interface. Remember previously I worked on the command line. In this case, I will go to that compliance center. So to go there, I'll need to switch to that protection office.com to go to that M365 compliance center. And in this case, I will use graphical interface to create those retention labels and policies. So from here, I will just click here. You will see I can create also those different classifications, data loss prevention settings. So for now, I will select directly that option under information governance. And in here, I will select retention. So here under retention, I will create, you'll see for now, it's fine. From here, I could create the labels and the policies. So I will hit create, and this will walk me through a wizard that I can do all those different definitions. So from here, I'm gonna type in on the nails, let's say that will be related to that sales retention policy. Description, just gonna quickly add something like retention policy for sales 7 years, let's say. That's retention time. After that, I'm going to select next, and after here, just need to specify for how long. So let's say for 7 years, and after that, based on which I will determine those 7 years, when I was created, when it was last modified. In this case, let's say when it was last modified, and in this case, if you would like to delete or not the data after this time. So for now, let's say no. So data just will be maintained, it won't be deleted after that. Next option will be definitely locations, which all the different services that this policy will be applied. In this case, super important, make sure that this is enabled for now. Let's concentrate just on Teams. So let's select channel messages, and you can see here I can specify specific teams, or I can also exclude teams as well. So for now, I will hit the option choose teams. I will select choose teams, and in this case, let's say only that will affect only that sales team that was previously created. After that, just gonna hit next, review the settings, and after that, I will select create this policy. Now that's how easy I can create that retention policy. Now let me show you also how easy it is to create, in this case, that DLP policy. So for that DLP policy, I will also need to do the definition from the compliance center. So I need to switch to that data loss prevention node on the left. So I will select that option, data loss prevention, and in here I will select that policy option. So here in policy, I will select the option create a policy, and in here definitely need to start from scratch. So things like PCI, IPA, and other are already available as a definition of things like social security numbers, driver license numbers. All those definitions already are available. Also, you can create a custom definition. In this case, let's say this is target for GDPR. So I will search that definition, GDPR. So it's already there. And in this case, just need to specify a name. So let's name this GDPR DLP policy. So that will be the name for my policy. After that, on the description, and also let's add something like data loss prevention policy for teams. After that, just gonna hit next, and after that, locations that this policy will affect. So I will choose that option. Let me choose a specific locations, otherwise will affect for all the services inside Microsoft 365. So actually let me toggle off that for Exchange, SharePoint, and OneDrive. And for now, let's concentrate just only on Teams. So if I don't select specific teams, this will affect for all the different chat and channel messages. So I'm going to select next. After that, find the content. You will see a lot of things already part of the definition, things like European debit card numbers, driver license numbers. Definitely need to start from scratch. The definition is ready to use. All those definitely types of data that are included into that GDPR definition. So after that, you will see what will happen if I detect that this type of content is trying to be shared. So in this case, definitely will be super important in this case to keep an eye if this is shared with people outside your organization. So let's keep that definition by default. After that, select next is what you want to do if we detect this sensitive info. So in this case, definitely I would like to get another over email. And in this case, you can also specify a threshold, in this case, how many instances. So in this case, let's say just one instance. Just one instance, in this case, someone is trying to share just one of those types of data and basically will be flagged out. After that, we'll see also on the user interface, definitely it will have like those tooltips. Basically, maybe you see this on Outlook, for example, if I try to send an email, so when this may be out of office, it will basically give you just an alert to maybe this person is not able to reply because it's out of office. It will be kind of the similar behavior, but in this case, it will tell you, you know what, you're trying to share information that in this case is restricted using a policy. And also in this case, I will also double check and enable that restrict access and basically will encrypt the content and will basically block people from sharing and restrict access to that content. Definitely you don't want to have that content shared. After that, and next, we can also override the permissions. So what happens, definitely will block only for people outside the organization. And after that, definitely like to have that tip override the policy. In this case, they tip this as on. And if definitely someone would like to override the definition, let's select that option that required business justification. And also important, if there are any other rules that maybe can flag out as false positives, definitely we should be able to override this definition. So after that, do you want to turn on the policy or just test the things? So in this case, basically, as you're starting, maybe just like to try it out and not actually put this in place. So a good idea is, for example, to keep this, I just would like to test it. So definitely, if a definition is flagged out based on this condition, actually the content won't be blocked, but basically we just will get another and we'll have that visibility. So for now, I will select that option. Definitely is a good idea, good starting point. I like to test it at first. And also select that show policy tips while in test mode. I'm gonna select next. And in this case, I'm gonna hit create. So as easy as that, I created a retention policy and a DLP policy. And with that, it's the end of this demo. So in this module number 2, we just cover all these different technologies and tools that we have available in this case to guide you and apply those governance security requirements into that Microsoft Teams deployment. So now definitely you're ready to start thinking about that deployment, how we'll install the Microsoft Teams client, and all the different features that we have available in there. So let's take another 10-minute break, see everyone back here, then to begin with module number 3.